I first met Jake back in second grade. We got assigned to the same table, and it was like we clicked right away. Turns out we had a ton in common: Legos, drawing, video games, you name it. Almost every day after school, we'd hang out. Jake would come over, and we'd spend hours glued to the TV playing video games. When we finally got bored, we'd switch to building crazy Lego creations. As we got older, Jake became my unofficial bodyguard. I was a scrawny kid, always getting picked on by the older guys, but Jake was always there to step in. He had this way of scaring them off just by showing up. His size did all the talking. By the time we hit middle school, Jake was already a giant. He stood 6 feet 4 inches and weighed over 200 pounds. Nobody dared mess with him, and since we were inseparable, they left me alone too. But underneath all that size, Jake was one of the nicest guys I knew. Still, he hated being so big. He always said it made him feel out of place, whether at school or even at home. Jake's parents were on the shorter side. His mom was barely 5 feet 2 inches, and his dad wasn't much taller at 5 feet 8 inches. His mom was always so kind to me, baking cookies every time I visited. His dad, though, that guy intimidated me. He wasn't particularly tall, but he made up for it with his stocky build, broad shoulders, big arms, and his voice sounded like gravel, like he'd just rolled out of bed. Something I noticed early on was that Jake didn't eat meat. The first time he came over for dinner, we had steak, and he wouldn't touch it. "I'm good with just the salad and potatoes," he said. At the time, I thought it was strange because I didn't really know about vegetarians or vegans. Then I went to his house and saw their freezer packed with meat. Chicken, pork, turkey, you name it. I asked him about it one day while we were messing around on his computer, and he got quiet before saying, "Oh, that's just for my parents. They're big on it. Not me." When we got older, I straight up asked if he was a vegetarian. His answer stuck with me. "Yeah, something like that," he said. It seemed odd, but I didn't push it. Eventually, I just let it go. By the time high school rolled around, Jake started changing. He was getting into fights a lot and racking up suspensions. The older kids still messed with him, and when he fought back, they'd gang up and beat him to a pulp. I'd visit him, and he'd have black eyes or bruises, but he never really explained why he kept fighting. Every time I brought it up, he'd dodge the topic and shift to something else. Meanwhile, I was still getting bullied too, but I didn't let it get to me. I ignored them, and they'd eventually back off. There was one weird thing about Jake's house that always stuck in my mind: the basement. I only went down there once, and something felt off. It was huge, this wide-open space with just a couple of fridges stocked with more meat and a lot of ice. Most of the time, the door was locked. It seemed strange, but I didn't think much of it after a while. Then one day, Dylan, this guy who was basically the ringleader of the group that picked on Jake, disappeared. At first, no one noticed he wasn't at school for a few days. But when those days turned into weeks, and then months, missing posters started popping up all over town. The rumors spread fast. A lot of people whispered that Jake had something to do with it. I refused to believe it. Jake was my best friend. He'd never do something like that, right? But I'd be lying if I said I didn't have doubts. When I finally asked him about it, he swore on his mom's life that he had nothing to do with Dylan's disappearance. The police kept looking for Dylan for months, but eventually they gave up. Life moved on for most people, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Strangely enough, Jake seemed a lot happier once the search was called off. That's when the suspicion started creeping in. I tried bringing Dylan up again with Jake, but it didn't go well. He'd blow up, accusing me of doubting him and falling for the rumors. "How can you not believe your best friend?" he'd say. After that, I stopped asking. Eventually, I let the whole thing fade into the background, just like everyone else. As high school moved along, things started to look up for me and Jake. Jake got really into football, and he turned into a powerhouse linebacker. He was so good, in fact, that colleges started offering him scholarships. Me? I wasn't much into sports, but I did meet someone special. Her name was Sarah, and she'd eventually become my wife. Sarah had this energy that drew you in, average height, with long red hair and eyes that looked like they could stop traffic. We were pretty much perfect for each other. We shared a love for books, writing, and movies. Most nights, I'd head over to her place, and we'd curl up together on the couch watching rom-coms. It became a ritual, but there was one problem. Sarah wasn't exactly fond of Jake. One night, While we were hanging out in her room, I casually asked her about it. Mike, she said with a bit of frustration in her voice, he's just creepy. And didn't he do something to a kid at school last year? I shot her a confused look. Sarah, he didn't do anything like that. Sure, he might have roughed the kid up a bit, but he wouldn't go that far. That's not Jake. She raised an eyebrow. How can you be so sure? People lie when they're backed into a corner. He promised you, but anyone can say that. I stopped and thought about it. Jake had sworn on his mom's life. That's more than a promise, right? I shook it off. I couldn't believe Jake would do something so messed up. I quickly changed the subject, and Sarah didn't push it any further. We finished watching the movie, but my mind kept drifting back to the conversation. I glanced at my watch as the movie neared its end. It was 9:34 p.m. Crap, my mom's gonna be pissed. I jumped up, kissed Sarah goodbye, and said, we'll finish it later. She smiled, blowing me a kiss. Okay, love you. I ran out, dialing my mom as I grabbed my keys. Where are you? It's 9:34. You were supposed to be back by 9:30, she snapped. Sorry, Mom. I lost track of time, I said, my voice hurried as I got into the car. She sighed, but wasn't too upset. All right, just drive safely. I'll see you at home. Love you. Love you too, I replied. The drive home felt like it took forever. Sarah's words replayed over and over in my mind. Anyone can lie when they're desperate. Maybe she had a point. Maybe Jake wasn't being truthful. But no, this was Jake, my best friend, the guy who had my back for years. It didn't feel right. Then I remembered that one time when I asked Jake about the missing kid, Dylan. Jake had looked me straight in the eyes and said, Mike, why wouldn't you trust me? I swear to God, I didn't do anything to Dylan. I promise. You have to believe me, man. I pulled into the driveway, the weight of those words hanging in the air. Who was I supposed to trust? My girlfriend or my best friend? I stepped inside, and my mom was sitting at the kitchen counter drinking water. She glanced up as I came in. Hey, Mike, how was your time at Sarah's? She asked. It was good. We watched some of the 50 Shades of Grey movie. Didn't finish it, but we'll catch up tomorrow, I replied. Oh, fun, she said, smiling as she gave me a hug. We didn't get into the whole divorce thing much. My parents had split when I was younger, not because of anything bad, just because they grew apart. I went back and forth between their places. My dad wasn't far from here, so it wasn't hard to juggle both homes. Are you hungry? She asked. No, I'm good, I said, but then paused. Actually, I've been meaning to ask you something. What's up? She asked, curious. It's about Jake. She raised an eyebrow, but didn't say anything. I was wondering, what do you think of him? You've known him forever, right? My mom took a second to think, then said, well, I think he's a good kid. He's been your best friend for so long, and he's always been there for you, like a protector. I smiled a little at that. Yeah, he's always been there for me. Then I dropped the bomb. But you remember that kid who went missing last year at school? Dylan? Her face stiffened slightly. Of course I do. That was all over the news. I was getting messages from people. Everyone was talking about it. Well, do you think Jake had anything to do with it? My mom went quiet for a moment. She didn't look at me, her gaze moving to the floor. Then she slowly met my eyes. I don't think Jake would do something like that, she said. Why would you think that? I don't know. It's just, when the police were looking into it, Jake was acting so weird. He was nervous, almost like he knew something he wasn't saying. And then, when they stopped looking, it was like he just went back to normal. My mom thought for a moment. Well, maybe he was just scared. Maybe he didn't want to get caught up in the rumors. Or maybe he was afraid the police would think he was guilty. There are a lot of reasons why someone could be nervous when the cops are involved. I thought about it. That made sense, I guess. Jake wasn't the type to hurt anyone. Maybe he was just afraid. Thanks for listening, Mom, I said, heading upstairs. Of course, sweetie. I love you. I love you too. The next day, I texted Jake to see if he wanted to hang out at lunch. He said yes, and we met up in the cafeteria. We talked about everything, football, school, girls, life in general. It was like old times again, and I realized how much I missed it. I've missed hanging out with you, man. It feels like we never do anymore, Jake said, his voice a little softer. I know, right? We definitely need to do this more, I said, grinning. How about tonight, he said, his eyes lighting up. You free? Yeah, I'm down, I said. The bell rang, and we both stood up. He slapped me a fist bump and said, sweet man, come over to my place at 4. Sounds good. See you then, I said, waving as I walked off to my next class. After school, I met up with Sarah. I always walked her home, and today was no different. But as we walked, she asked, "Do you want to come over tonight to finish the movie?" "Sorry, babe, not tonight. I'm hanging out with Jake," I said. She frowned, and I could tell she wasn't happy. "Mike, you know I don't trust him. He's dangerous. I just get this weird feeling when I'm around him." I felt my frustration rise. "Sarah, he's my best friend. He's always been there for me, no matter what. I'm not going to stop hanging out with him just because of rumors from a year ago. You have to trust me on this." She didn't say anything the rest of the walk. When we got to her house, she just turned and walked inside without a word. No goodbye. No I love you. The door slammed behind her. I sighed and walked home. I checked my phone. It was 3:34 p.m. I figured I'd head to Jake's now. Jake's house was just a couple of minutes away, so I grabbed a snack, told my mom where I was going, and headed out. "All right, Mike, have fun. Just be back by 9:30, okay?" she said. "I won't forget," I said, giving her a quick hug before leaving. I walked to Jake Street, and there it was, his house. The first one on the block, a two-story brown house with small windows on the top and bottom floors. I checked my phone. It was 3:48 p.m., a little early, but I didn't think Jake would mind. I rang the doorbell, and before I could even check the time again, the door swung open. "Hey, Mom, glad you could make it," Jake said with that trademark grin. I stepped into the house, and everything looked as it always had. The same red couch in the living room, the same brown dining table, the large family portrait of Jake's family hanging on the wall. Nothing had changed. Jake's mom greeted me with a warm hug. "Hey, Mike, it's been a while. How's everything?" "I'm good, Mrs. Miller," I replied, returning the hug. I noticed Jake's dad watching the game on TV. He glanced over, nodded at me, and I nodded back. Without saying much, Jake and I headed upstairs to his room. His room had been redecorated since I'd last seen it. Football posters were plastered all over the walls. He was all about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I could see it in the jerseys and player photos covering the space. We fired up the PlayStation, and without much discussion, started playing Madden, his favorite game. I wasn't as into it, but I could tell Jake was having a blast, so I stuck with it. We played for about an hour before switching to Call of Duty. Time flew by as we laughed and talked about old memories. But as the night wore on, things got quieter. Competitiveness took over. I checked the time. 9 p.m. Almost time to head out. After the game, I told Jake I was going downstairs to get a drink. He didn't even look up, focused on his game. "Okay, hurry up. I'm about to wreck you again," he teased. "You wish." I laughed, heading for the stairs. I crept downstairs, trying to keep the noise down since Jake's parents had already gone to bed. In the kitchen, I found the cabinet with the cups and grabbed a glass of water. As I drank, something in the air caught my attention. The smell started faint, then quickly grew stronger. It was nauseating, sweet and sharp, like something burning. The scent triggered a memory. A dead squirrel I'd passed by on the road a week ago, the smell almost identical. I couldn't ignore it. I followed the scent through the darkened hallway, my curiosity pushing me forward. I froze when I reached the basement door, slightly ajar, the smell clearly coming from down there. My heart pounded in my chest. Should I go down? A part of me said no, but another part urged me to investigate. I pulled out my phone, using the flashlight to light the way as I descended the stairs. The basement looked the same as always, but the smell, it was unbearable now. I could see a plastic container tucked in the far corner by one of the fridges. I slowly approached it, each step amplifying the putrid odor. When I reached the container, I froze. My breath hitched. Inside was some kind of meat, but that wasn't what caught my attention. On top of the meat were two human fingers, and between the meat, I saw an eye. I stumbled back, nearly choking on my own breath. It couldn't be, but my mind raced, the answer slowly creeping in. This wasn't just any meat. It was someone's body. Someone I knew. A voice interrupted my thoughts. "You shouldn't be here, Mike." I spun around. There, standing at the top of the stairs, was Jake. His face was blank, empty, no emotion at all. We stood frozen for a moment, neither of us speaking. "Jake, what the hell is all this?" My voice was barely above a whisper, my fear rising. "That Jake said, his voice calm, is something I need to keep hidden. Something important to me. I swallowed hard. Is that a person? Jake's lips twisted into a grin. Maybe. Maybe it's someone we both knew. My heart raced as panic set in. Jake, just tell me what this is. I demanded, my voice trembling. Jake's eyes darkened, his grin widening. You're not going to like it, Mike, he said. Then he pulled out a knife from his pocket, and my blood turned cold. I backed into the corner, my legs shaking, as Jake slowly advanced. When Dylan was walking home from school that day, I knew I had to do something. I didn't want to, but I had no choice. I grabbed him, knocked him out, and brought him here. It was perfect. No one saw me do it. He seemed lost in the memory, and for a moment, he almost looked like he was enjoying it. Stabbing Dylan, hearing him scream, it felt so good. The best thing I've ever felt. I could barely breathe, my mind reeling. This wasn't the friend I'd known. This wasn't Jake. He stepped closer, the knife still in hand. I never told you this, Mike. When I was a kid, my mom burned her hand on the stove, and a piece of skin fell off. I was curious, so I ate it. It tasted so good, like crispy bacon, but better. And that was it. That's when I realized I had a hunger. I could barely hear him over the pounding of my heart. He was inches from me now, the knife pressing into my chest. When I killed Dylan, I couldn't stop. He tasted so good. I couldn't resist. So I've been keeping his body here, eating it when I need to. You know I can't eat regular meat, Mike. You've seen it. I just need it. His breath was shallow, his voice almost pleading. And you know what? I think you'll taste good too. I froze. I had to act. There was no way I was going to be his next meal. Without thinking, I swung my phone at his face. The impact was hard, and Jake stumbled back screaming in pain. Blood poured from his mouth. I didn't wait for him to recover. I ran, my feet barely touching the ground. I hit the basement stairs, but Jake grabbed my ankle, trying to pull me back down. With everything I had, I kicked him in the face hard. I heard his nose break as he recoiled, and I ran the rest of the way up the stairs, out of the house, and into the night. I didn't stop running until I reached my house. I slammed the door behind me and collapsed, my chest heaving. Mike, where have you been? My mom's voice snapped me back to reality. I've been calling you for hours. I was about to call the cops. I broke down, tears pouring down my face. My mom held me, trying to calm me as I told her everything. When I finished, she immediately called the police. Within minutes, they were at our door. The officers, a man and a woman, listened to everything. They told us they had arrested Jake, found him in the basement knocked out cold, still in the same spot where I'd left him. They found the container and everything I described to my mom. The body was identified soon after, though they didn't tell me who it was. I had my suspicions, but I already knew. Jake's parents were arrested too. My mom had told the cops everything. The officers said they didn't resist at all. They just put their hands out, didn't say a word. Gave up the second we walked in, the male officer said. After giving us the details about the trial and charges, the cops left. I went to bed that night, hoping I could forget what I'd just witnessed, but I knew the nightmare would never leave me. The DNA test came in the next day, and the body was confirmed to be Dylan. It felt like the whole school was buzzing with the news. People pointed and whispered as I walked through the halls, their eyes following me like I was some kind of freak. Sarah rushed up to me between classes, practically throwing herself at me in a tight hug. She had tears in her eyes, and I could feel her shaking. Mike, are you okay? I was so worried when you didn't answer any of my calls or texts. I thought something happened to you, she said, voice quivering. I didn't say anything. I felt completely drained, like I had nothing left in me to respond. The rest of the day went by in a blur, with everyone talking about Jake and asking me if I was all right. A week later, Jake's trial was set to begin. They asked me to come in as a witness, but I turned them down. The idea of seeing him again made me sick to my stomach. Even without me, Jake pled guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison. His parents were found guilty of aiding and abetting and got 30 years. After graduation, I left town and moved to Seattle to attend the University of Washington. Sarah followed me there, and we rented a small apartment. Not long after, we decided to get married. At college, we both studied journalism, and after graduating, we got jobs at the Washington Post as reporters. We kept writing, eventually publishing a book of short stories. A decade later, I was the editor at the Washington Post, and Sarah was the executive editor. We had 2 kids, Charlie, who was a lot like us, quiet, sharp, and thoughtful, and Richard, who was a social butterfly, always talking and never sitting still. He loved sports, while Charlie preferred drawing and reading. Life was good. We had a nice house in a safe neighborhood, good careers, and a family that meant the world to us. One morning, as I was getting ready for work, drinking my coffee, I caught something on the news. Breaking news: Jake Miller has escaped from prison. Police say he broke out by tampering with a vent in his cell and used the sewer system as an escape route. They also mentioned how long it took him to plan and execute it, based on the damage they found on the vent. The killer, Jake Miller, was notorious for the brutal murder of Dylan. I shut off the TV immediately, my heart pounding. My mind raced back to the memories of that night. I could feel the sweat forming on my skin as Sarah walked down the stairs. "Mike, what's wrong?" she asked, noticing my frozen state. I couldn't speak. The man who had haunted my nightmares, who had once been my best friend, was out there. And now he was free. Suddenly, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw an unknown number calling. My hands were shaking as I answered it. "Ushino?" I croaked. The voice on the other end made my blood run cold. I hadn't heard it in years, but I'd never forget it. "Hey, Mike, it's been a while," Jake's voice said, smooth and almost playful. I couldn't move, couldn't think. I just stood there, my mouth hanging open, unable to speak. The voice, it was him, that cold, calculated tone that had once made me feel safe, now sending shivers down my spine. "Did you miss me, Mike?" he continued, his voice sickeningly calm. "I've been thinking about you, you know. About everything. You were the only one who understood me." "What do you want, Jake?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. I glanced at Sarah, who was watching me, her face full of concern. She mouthed, "Who is it?" But I couldn't answer her. Jake chuckled, the sound hollow. "Relax, Mike. I just wanted to check in, see how things are going. You got a nice little life now, don't you? The wife, the kids, the job. Makes me wonder, what would you do to keep all of that?" I felt a surge of panic, then anger. "Don't you dare touch my family," I shouted, my heart racing as I turned away from Sarah's confused expression. "Touch them?" Jake laughed again, but it was dark, twisted. "No, Mike, I wouldn't hurt them. Not yet. But here's the thing, you've got everything I never had, and that's made me think. Prison changes you, you know? Makes you smarter, more patient. And I got all the time in the world." I clenched the phone harder, trying to stay calm. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "You'll find out soon enough," Jake said, his voice becoming more sinister. "But for now, just know this. I'm closer than you think." The line went dead. My whole body felt numb. I stood there, staring at the phone, before it slipped from my hand. Sarah rushed over, her face filled with worry. "Mike, who was that? What's going on?" she asked. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. It was Jake. He escaped, her face drained of color. "Oh my God, what do we do now?" "We call the police," I said, my voice firm. "And we get ready. He's not going to ruin our lives again. Not if I can help it." But as I dialed the number, one terrifying thought gnawed at me. If Jake was as close as he said, how much time did we really have?